$16 trillion worth of dollar loans are outstanding at this point in time in the world, and emerging markets alone are borrowing roughly $6 trillion plus from global investors. Dollarization goes much beyond international trade. De-dollarization broadly refers to trend of using less of US dollars, be it in settling the international trade or when global banks are extending cross-border credit to importers or exporters and so on. But before we understand de-dollarization, let's take a look at how much dollarized the world currently is. Roughly 85% of India's imports and exports, for example, are billed and settled in US dollars, when only 15% of our trade actually happens with the US. This is true not only for India but for most emerging economies. For example, Latin American economies as well as Asian economies, where 85% plus trade is invoiced and settled in dollars. Settlement of international trade in dollars is going to be supported by even bigger US dollar credit market, where global and local banks are supplying dollars to importers around the world. Dollarization goes much beyond international trade. In fact, 40% of US government bonds are held by foreigners. Huge amount of central bank foreign exchange reserves are held in US dollars. And when time is tough, investors and global money managers fly back to the US to seek safety. De-dollarization trend is visible in many markets. India, for example, is actively settling trade in rupees with Russia, Sri Lanka, and growing number of countries. In fact, 20 foreign banks have opened rupee trade settlement accounts over last 1 year alone with RBI. Russia has been reducing its dependence on dollars steadily over last decade. Egypt has recently called for local currency settlement with all the BRICS countries, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, and so on. This trend really accentuated after US froze Russia's foreign exchange reserves worth $330 billion. Central banks in Singapore, India, China, and even European central banks have bought record amount of gold in 2022, diversifying away from dollars. Gold buying by all the central banks exceeded 1,000 tons in 2022, which was a 100% jump compared to 2021. Now central banks hold less than 60% of their reserves in dollars compared to 75% a decade back. China, the biggest investors of the US government bonds, has reduced its investments in the US bonds by roughly a third over the last 7 to 8 years. Who is replacing dollars? Who is grabbing the spot? Yuan, for example, now accounts for 7% of global trade settlement. It's still the world dominated by US dollar. 90% of foreign exchange transactions involve dollars on one side of it. Except China, most other countries have increased their investments in US government bonds over the last 5 years. And this includes India, Canada, France, Germany, Mexico. Argentina is even thinking of adopting US dollars as its official currency. And though countries might want to shift to other currencies to settle trade, it is very difficult for one country in supply chain to shift out of dollars and use other currency. The trend is definitely there for de-dollarization, both from private sector as well as governments, but dominant position of US dollar is still too dominant to be displaced in short span of time.